The Apartment of Whispers. Chapter 1. The Whispering Walls. Ilara had never liked the apartment when she first moved in. It was old, the kind of building that sagged with its own age. The floors groaned under her weight, as if warning her she didn't belong. The paint peeled in corners, and the wallpaper, yellowed and curling, seemed to shift in the dim glow of the streetlights outside. But the rent was cheap, and she needed a place to call her own. By the end of her first week, the noises had started. At first, it was subtle. A creak in the floorboards, the faucet dripping in the middle of the night. She told herself it was nothing unusual. Old buildings made noise. Nothing to worry about. Then came the whispers. She was brushing her teeth one night when she heard it, soft and tentative, barely louder than a sigh. Ilara. She froze, toothpaste foam in her mouth, heart hammering. Her eyes darted around the empty bathroom. The light flickered. The whisper came again, clearer this time, from the bedroom. Ilara, come. Spit and fear mingled in her mouth as she swallowed. Her legs moved on their own, carrying her to the bedroom. The room was exactly as she had left it. The bed neatly made, the curtains drawn, shadows stretching in the corners. But she felt a presence, something watching, just beyond her vision. "Who's there?" she demanded, voice cracking. Silence answered her. The hairs on her neck stood on end. She told herself it was her imagination, the wind, a trick of the brain. She climbed into bed, pulling the quilt over her shoulders. "Don't think about it," she told herself. "It's just an old apartment. Nothing's wrong." Minutes later, she heard it again, soft, deliberate, coming from the kitchen this time. "Ilara!" She jumped out of bed, heart pounding. "I'm not playing games," she shouted. Her voice echoed against the walls. The apartment swallowed it up, giving back only silence and a faint, cold draft that brushed against her ankles. Then she saw the mirror. It was her reflection, but not exactly. Her reflection smiled, slowly, deliberately, the kind of smile that made her skin crawl. She didn't smile back. She blinked, and the figure in the mirror leaned closer, pressing a pale hand against the glass. "Sleep now," it whispered. She screamed, but the sound caught in her throat. Her body froze. She ran to the door, yanking it open, only to find the hallway empty, dimly lit by the flickering bulb. She pressed her ear against the wood and could hear it. Soft footsteps, pacing back and forth. Her apartment had always been quiet, but now it felt alive, almost breathing. Something moved in the shadows, just out of sight. Her eyes were drawn to the floorboards, the dark corners. Ilara locked the door behind her, shaking. I'm going to call someone," she whispered. She reached for her phone, but the screen went black. Not dead battery black. Something had turned it off. The whispers began again, softer, almost patient. "Don't leave. Stay." Her breath hitched. The quilt was slipping off the bed, but no one was there. Cold fingers brushed her hand. She jerked back, heart in her throat. The whispers stopped, leaving only silence. She didn't sleep that night, and when morning came, she realized she didn't feel relief, only exhaustion, and the sense that something had waited patiently through the dark, watching. Chapter 2. The Eyes in the Dark. The next morning, Alara woke with her body trembling, drenched in sweat. The apartment felt heavier. The sunlight seeping through the curtains didn't lighten the shadows, it only seemed to make them sharper, more defined, as if the corners of the room had deepened while she slept. She poured herself coffee, trying to convince herself it was all exhaustion, stress from work, maybe even hunger. But when she glanced at the kitchen counter, she froze. There were footprints. Tiny, pale, wet footprints leading from the sink toward the living room. They were too small to be human, or maybe too thin, too sharp-edged, and they disappeared into the carpet, leaving no explanation. Her heart pounded as she whispered, "This isn't real. It's not real. It's not real." Hours passed, yet the feeling of being watched didn't fade. Every sound, the fridge humming, the radiator ticking, even the distant honk of a car outside felt amplified, threatening. She tried calling a friend, anyone, but her phone screen stayed black, unresponsive, as if it too was part of the apartment now. By evening, the whispering returned. "Alara, come, sleep with me." She bolted upright from her chair, the mug clattering to the floor. The whisper came from behind her, though when she turned, the living room was empty. The shadows in the corners seemed to ripple, moving like liquid. "Stop it," she shouted, her voice shaking. I don't want to play." The whisper stopped abruptly. The silence was so thick it pressed against her ears, made her feel like she couldn't breathe. Then, from the mirror in the hallway, she saw them. Eyes. Dozens of them, pale and unblinking, reflecting her own terror. They stared at her, some close, some far, lining the frame as if peering from a separate dimension. She backed away, heart hammering. "Who are you? What do you want?" No answer came, but the temperature in the room dropped sharply. Her breath came out in visible clouds. And then, soft, deliberate footsteps approached, not from the floor, from the walls, from inside the apartment itself. Her apartment wasn't just haunted, it was alive. Alara ran to the bedroom, slamming the door, locking it, pressing her back against it. She could hear the scuttling outside the door, whispering right against the wood. "Don't hide, I can see you." Her phone flickered on, showing a single text. "Sleep now, Alara." Panic took her. She threw the phone across the room. It shattered, glass glittering like frozen stars on the floor. The whispers escalated, layering over one another, chanting, coaxing, sinisterly patient. "Sleep. Come. Here." The shadows moved then, spilling from the corners into the center of the room, coalescing into shapes that were almost human, but not quite. Thin, elongated, with eyes that gleamed like wet stone. One of them reached out, fingers impossibly long, brushing her arm. She screamed, stumbling backward. The bedroom window rattled, as though something was pressing at it from the outside. She tried opening it, throwing it open, but the glass wouldn't budge. Something heavy, unseen, pressed from behind. By the time the clock ticked past midnight, Alara's body was numb with terror. She hadn't moved in hours. The whispers had turned into a symphony of voices, all calling her name, all demanding, all patient. She knew she would never truly sleep again, not safely. And somewhere in the darkness, she could feel a presence lying in wait just beneath her bed, patient, cold, ready for the moment she finally closed her eyes. Chapter 3. The apartment breathes. Alara awoke to a faint, wet sound, like someone dragging something across the floor. At first, she thought it was a dream, the kind that clings to the edge of sleep, leaving your heart racing and your limbs stiff. But then she realized the sound was real. It came from the living room. She froze beneath the covers, straining to hear. The noise stopped as suddenly as it had started, replaced by a low, almost imperceptible whisper. "Alara, come." Her throat constricted.
She had tried to leave before, to call someone to escape, but the apartment had blocked every path. Doors wouldn't open, windows refused to budge, and her phone had been dead for days. She was trapped, alone with whatever lived inside these walls. Summoning every ounce of courage, she pulled herself from bed, wrapping the quilt tightly around her shoulders like armor. The air felt thick, heavy, as though the apartment itself had lungs, exhaling cold, fetid breaths into her face. She inched toward the bedroom door, heart pounding with every step. The hallway stretched unnaturally, longer than it should have been, shadows crawling along the walls like living things. She saw movement out of the corner of her eye, shapes flickering in and out of the darkness. Eyes, always eyes, unblinking, staring from impossible angles. "Ilara," the voice whispered again, closer this time, almost behind her. She spun around. Nothing. She stumbled to the living room, hoping, foolishly, that the light of day would offer safety. But the room was darker than before, shadows pooling like ink in the corners. The footprints had returned, only now they moved in circles, tracing her path through the apartment. And the whispers were all around her now, echoing in walls, floorboards, ceiling. "Sleep. Stay here." The radiator rattled violently. Something skittered across the floor. Ilara screamed, backing away, and ran toward the kitchen. But the room had changed. The walls seemed closer, the ceiling lower, the corners stretching unnaturally. She pressed herself against the fridge, feeling the cold metal against her cheek, trying to convince herself that the apartment wasn't alive. Then she saw it, a shape emerging from the wall, thin and elongated, a silhouette that shouldn't exist. It crept forward, limbs bending in impossible ways, eyes glowing faintly like wet stones. She tried to scream again, but no sound escaped. The figure tilted its head, observing her silently, waiting. The whispers became a chant, repeating her name over and over, a rhythm that burrowed into her mind. She clutched her head, desperate to block it out. "Ilara, sleep now, sleep now, sleep now." Her legs gave way. She collapsed onto the floor, curling into herself, rocking back and forth. She could feel the presence now, pressing against her from all sides, under the bed, inside the walls, even behind her eyes. The apartment wasn't just a place. It was a predator, patient and meticulous, and she had wandered straight into its lair. Hours, or was it days? She had lost all sense of time. She hadn't eaten, hadn't moved, hadn't blinked. Only the whispers continued, coaxing, promising, threatening. And in the corner, where the shadows pooled deepest, a pair of eyes glinted, waiting, patient, hungry. And as Ilara finally drifted, exhausted beyond reason, she realized, too late, that the whisper was right. Sleep now, forever.
Chapter 4. Fractured Walls. Ilara woke, or thought she did, to the sound of laughter. Soft, wet, unhuman. It echoed from the corners of her apartment, ricocheting off walls that seemed farther apart than they should be. Her chest heaved and every instinct screamed to run. But where could she go? The doors had become walls. The windows refused to open. She was trapped. She stumbled to the hallway mirror. Her reflection was wrong. Not simply smiling this time, but moving independently. Her reflection leaned out, touching the glass from the inside, fingers pressing against the surface like cold claws. And then it whispered, voice slick with amusement. "You shouldn't have come here, Ilara." Ilara tried to scream, but the sound was swallowed by the apartment. The mirror rippled, as though liquid, and shapes began to crawl within it. Elongated limbs, pale faces with hollow eyes, all reaching for her. She fell backward, heart hammering, and scrambled to the bedroom,
slamming the door behind her. The walls groaned and pulsed. Something was moving beneath the surface, pressing, stretching, waiting. And then came the whispers, louder now, layered, impossible to ignore. Sleep. Stay. Join us. She curled into a corner, covering her ears, rocking back and forth. The apartment seemed to breathe, inhaling her fear and exhaling shadows. The floorboards creaked under invisible feet. The radiator rattled violently, and through the dark she felt it. Fingers brushing her arms, her legs, crawling over her skin like ice. Suddenly, the lights flickered. The shadows detached from the corners of the room, twisting into shapes that moved independently. They advanced slowly, circling her, whispering her name, laughing softly. Elara screamed, and the apartment answered. The walls shuddered, the ceiling warped. She backed against the bed, eyes wide, chest heaving. The shapes coalesced into one figure, a thin, impossibly tall silhouette, eyes glinting with wet stone light. It leaned close. "Sleep now, forever," it hissed. Desperation drove her to the door. She ripped at the handle. It didn't budge. She tried the windows. They were solid as stone. Her phone lay shattered on the floor, its screen dark. The apartment had claimed all exits. She sank to the floor, trembling, rocking back and forth. The shadows crawled along the walls toward her, pooling around her legs, lifting her hair as if tasting her fear. She could hear them breathing, whispering, laughing. Every shadow seemed to have a voice, all chanting, coaxing, threatening. "Sleep, sleep, join us." Elara realized, with a shiver that ran down her spine, that she would never escape. The apartment was alive, and it had decided she belonged to it. "Sleep now," whispered the reflection, and this time, she couldn't fight the pull.
Chapter 5. Dreams in the Walls. Elara awoke, or thought she did, in a darkness so complete it pressed against her eyelids. The apartment had changed again. The floor felt slick under her bare feet, and the walls seemed to pulse as though they were breathing. She tried to stand, but her legs refused to obey. They were heavy, rooted to the floor, as if the apartment itself had grown claws to hold her down. A whisper slithered through the darkness. "Elara, come, sleep with us." Her heart raced. She blinked, and in the faint glow of the hallway she saw it. Shadows crawling out of the walls, not moving along them but emerging from within. Thin, spindly fingers stretched toward her, faces forming and dissolving in the darkness, eyes wet and gleaming. She stumbled backward, tripping over a carpet that hadn't been there before, and fell hard. Pain shot through her body, but the apartment ignored it, the shadows ignoring her cries. She reached for her phone. The cracked screen flickered on. A single message appeared. "You cannot leave, Elara. Sleep." She screamed, throwing it across the room. The phone shattered against the wall, black shards scattering like frozen stars. The whispers escalated into a chorus, overlapping, chanting her name, coaxing her toward the bed, toward the darkness. Trembling, she forced herself to crawl toward her bedroom, desperate to hide beneath the quilt, but the bed seemed farther away than before, the distance stretching unnaturally. The shadows followed her, brushing against her skin, cold and sticky, leaving goosebumps in their wake. When she finally collapsed onto the mattress, exhausted, the whispering didn't stop. It filled her ears, wrapped around her thoughts, burrowing deep into her mind. Her eyelids grew heavy, but sleep felt dangerous now, like opening the door to something waiting on the other side. And then it came. Her dreams, if they could even be called that, were no longer hers. She found herself walking the apartment, but it was wrong. The walls twisted, corridors spiraling into impossible angles, ceilings stretching into the black sky. Shadows led her, whispering, beckoning. Faces emerged from the walls, grinning, eyes fixed on her. "Ilara, join us," they murmured. She tried to scream, but no sound came. She ran, but the apartment always shifted, corridors looping back on themselves, walls closing in. She felt fingers brush her arms and neck, cold and relentless, dragging her closer to the deepest shadows. Hours or lifetimes passed. She no longer knew if she was awake or dreaming. The apartment had begun to bleed her reality and her imagination together. Every corner held movement. Every shadow had eyes. Every mirror reflected not her, but the apartment's intentions. Finally, she saw it. In the center of the living room, a figure, impossibly tall, thin, its face featureless except for wet, gleaming eyes. It extended a hand toward her. She wanted to run, to resist, but her body refused to obey. She... "Sleep, Ilara, forever." And she did, or at least she thought she did. When morning came, the apartment was silent. The sun filtered through the curtains, warm and ordinary, but she could still feel it. The eyes in the corners, the whispers behind the walls, the fingers beneath the bed. She had survived the night, but she knew deep down that it was only a matter of time. The apartment had claimed her, and it was patient. It always waits.
Chapter 6. Time Unraveled. Ilara woke, or perhaps never slept, inside a darkness so thick it pressed against her skull. The apartment no longer resembled the place she had moved into. Hallways stretched impossibly, doors led to rooms she didn't recognize, and the walls pulsed with a living rhythm, inhaling and exhaling in time with her own panicked breaths. She tried to move, but her body felt heavy, sluggish, like wading through thick water. Every step she took echoed, except the echoes weren't her own. Whispers answered her movements, whispering not only her name but fragments of memories she didn't remember sharing. Ilara, remember, remember. Her mind spun. Faces of strangers, or were they, flashed across the walls. Memories warped, twisting into lies she could not separate from truth. Had she really been alone? Had she really lived here a year? The apartment fed on her confusion, shaping her recollections into its own narrative. She stumbled toward the kitchen. The floorboards had changed. The refrigerator hummed a low, mocking tone, and when she opened it, she found nothing but mirrors stacked inside, each reflecting her back at her, older, younger, and always terrified. The reflection in the largest mirror spoke first. "You are mine." Her chest tightened, breath shallow. She tried to run to the bedroom, but the corridor twisted, doubled back, stretched farther than she remembered. The walls themselves shifted when she looked away, creating endless mazes of shadow. Every time she blinked, the layout changed, and with each change she caught glimpses of the figure lurking just beyond her vision. Thin, elongated, faceless, eyes glistening, patient. She collapsed against a wall, pressing her hands over her ears, hoping to block out the whispers. But the apartment had grown louder, more insistent, threading itself into her mind. Every heartbeat echoed in the walls, every breath reverberated in the floorboards. Sleep, sleep, forever. Suddenly her reflection in the nearest mirror moved independently again. It leaned out, a pale hand reaching toward her, brushing her cheek with impossible cold. Panic surged through her. She ran blindly, arms outstretched, crashing into walls that weren't there moments before. The shadows followed, thickening into shapes that hovered at the edge of her vision, whispering,
coaxing, beckoning. Time no longer existed. Days and nights blended into a single stretch of unending terror. She tried to remember what had been real, what had been her life before this nightmare, but the apartment erased it, replacing it with the constant pressure of being watched, hunted, claimed. Ilara sank to the floor, trembling, rocking back and forth, whispering her own name in a desperate attempt to anchor herself. But the apartment had other plans. The shadows encircled her, crawling over her body, sliding beneath the bed, through the walls, burrowing into her mind. Sleep now, Ilara, sleep forever. Chapter 7. The Shape of Fear. Ilara woke, or thought she woke, in a room that wasn't her bedroom. The walls curved impossibly. The ceiling stretched higher than any human building could contain, and the shadows pooled into dark rivers across the floor. The air was thick, heavy with the smell of damp stone and something sweeter, more metallic, like blood. She tried to stand, but her limbs felt strange, awkward, as if they didn't belong to her. Her arms were longer, thinner, fingers stretching unnaturally when she moved. She recoiled in horror, staring at them in the mirror. Her reflection mirrored the distortion, but with a cruel difference. The reflection smiled, a grotesque, knowing smile. "You are mine now, Ilara," it whispered, voice dripping with satisfaction. Panic clawed at her throat. She ran, or tried to, but the apartment had grown again. Corridors looped impossibly. Doors led to rooms she didn't recognize, and shadows slid along the walls with deliberate intent, always keeping pace, always whispering her name. "Sleep, join us." The whispers layered into a chorus, hundreds of voices now, echoing from the walls, the floor, the ceiling. Each whisper carried a memory that wasn't hers, a sensation she didn't recognize, a promise of surrender. She backed into the corner, pressing herself against the warped walls. The shadows pressed in, and she felt them, not just on the floor or walls, but inside her skin. Fingers brushed along her arms, legs, and neck, leaving trails of ice that burrowed into her bones. Her reflection in the mirror moved independently again. It leaned closer, pale hand reaching out, and this time she felt it, a cold, heavy pressure on her shoulder. She tried to recoil, but her body was no longer entirely her own. "Sleep now, forever." Her mind screamed, but no sound escaped. The apartment's breath filled her lungs, and every heartbeat echoed like a drum in the dark. Time was meaningless. Reality was gone. She existed only as a vessel for the apartment's hunger. The shadows began to solidify into shapes. Tall, thin, faceless, but eerily humanoid. They didn't just move, they communicated through subtle gestures, tilting their heads, stretching their limbs, pressing closer, urging her submission. Ilana could feel her body changing under their gaze, her form stretching, twisting in ways that should have been impossible. She tried to fight, to scream, to escape, but the apartment had erased the very notion of escape. Every turn of a hallway, every door she opened, every reflection she glimpsed brought her back to the same room, the center of the apartment, where the shadows pooled deepest, and the mirror reflected not her, but the entity that claimed her. Sleep, sleep, forever. Hours, or perhaps centuries, passed. Ilara could no longer remember her life before this place. She could no longer remember what it was like to feel safe, to touch, to breathe freely. All that remained was fear, pure, unrelenting, and intimate. She was no longer a visitor in the apartment. She was part of it. And somewhere behind her eyes, she could feel the whispers continuing, patient and knowing, coaxing her toward surrender, toward sleep, toward becoming one with the shadows that had always been waiting. Sleep now, Yalara. And she did, though not in peace.
Chapter 8. The Heart of the Apartment. Alara awoke, or existed, in a darkness so complete it swallowed every thought. The apartment had changed again. The wall stretched impossibly, pulsating with a rhythm like a heartbeat. The floor rippled beneath her feet, shadows pooling and receding like tidewater. She tried to move, to run, but her body no longer obeyed. Her limbs felt alien, twisted, responding only to the will of the apartment. A whisper slithered along the walls, thick and patient. Alara, you are mine. The mirrors multiplied, lining every hallway, every corner, reflecting her from angles that shouldn't exist. In each reflection, she saw herself, but distorted, twisted, smiling in a way she never had. The reflections didn't blink. They watched, patient and knowing, waiting for her to surrender. Her own voice sounded strange, echoing unnaturally. I won't. The apartment answered with laughter, a wet, echoing sound that vibrated through the floor, the walls, even inside her skull. Shadows began to detach from the corners, swirling around her, pressing in closer. She tried to shield herself, curling into herself, but the pressure penetrated her skin, filling her bones, burrowing into her mind. Sleep, join us, become. Suddenly, the apartment shifted entirely. Hallways stretched into infinite corridors. Doors opened into rooms she had never seen. Ceilings rose impossibly high, and the shadows thickened into forms. Thin, elongated, faceless, but humanoid, moving with patient intent. They whispered her name in voices layered over one another, a chorus of coaxing and threat. She stumbled into the central room, the heart of the apartment. The air was cold, thick, alive. The mirror at the far end gleamed, not reflecting her, but the apartment. A writhing mass of darkness, eyes, and shifting shapes pulsating in rhythm with the apartment's breath. You belong to me, it whispered, all of you. Her limbs, no longer fully her own, obeyed a force she could not resist. She reached for the mirror, the surface rippled, and she saw herself dissolve into the shadows, merging, twisting, becoming part of the darkness. The whispers became a chant, sleep, sleep, sleep. Time fractured. She felt lifetimes pass in moments, her identity splintering, memories unspooling, her mind unraveling. The apartment was no longer a place, it was a consciousness, and she was its tether, its vessel, its witness. Every shadow, every reflection, every whisper was a part of her now, and she was part of them. The last fragment of her will screamed against the inevitable, but it was swallowed, absorbed into the endless darkness. Her body twisted, elongated, melding with the shadows, and her final thought, faint and fleeting, was, I am here forever. And then there was silence. The apartment exhaled. It waited, patient, hungry, for the next arrival.
Chapter 9. Beyond the Walls. Ilara, or what remained of her, no longer recognized the apartment as a separate place.
It had grown, stretching into impossible dimensions, folding in on itself and seeping into the world beyond the walls. Every shadow in the hall, every flicker of light outside carried the apartment's presence. Even the city beyond her window felt distorted, filtered through the darkness that had claimed her. At first, she thought she was dreaming, but the whispers proved otherwise. They followed her wherever she looked, slithering through the cracks of reality. Ilara, sleep. Join us. She stumbled through the twisting corridors, walls stretching higher, shadows deepening. Mirrors now reflected not just her distorted self, but streets, rooms, even people she had never met. Each reflection seemed alive, eyes tracking her, mouths whispering her name. She realized with a creeping horror that the apartment had learned to reach beyond itself. She tried to scream into the empty corridors, hoping for a sound outside, but her voice echoed back from the walls, altered, layered, distorted. Every syllable she spoke became part of the apartment's song, woven into its consciousness. The shadows responded, shifting with predatory grace, forming shapes, tall, thin, faceless, always observing, always patient. Sleep. You cannot leave. Her body moved without consent, following corridors that twisted impossibly, looping back, folding over themselves. She tried doors, windows, exits. Every escape had vanished. Even when she thought she had reached the edge of the apartment, the world beyond was now a reflection of its darkness. Streets curling into hallways, the sky folding into ceilings, shadows stretching into corners that didn't exist. Ilara pressed herself against the walls, feeling them pulse with life, alive and aware, their rhythm matching her own heartbeat. Cold fingers brushed her skin from all directions, lifting her hair, crawling across her arms, sending shivers deep into her bones. The whispers grew louder, now layered with hundreds of voices, all chanting, coaxing, mocking. Sleep. Join us. Become. She glanced at a mirror along the hallway and saw her reflection standing behind her. But it wasn't her. It grinned, stretched impossibly tall, eyes wet and glimmering, teeth sharp, leaning closer with intent. She tried to run, but every step brought her back to the same room, the heart of the apartment. The shadows pulsed there, swirling into shapes, waiting, patient. Time had lost meaning. Minutes, hours, days, they all blended into one endless stretch of fear. Reality no longer had boundaries. She was everywhere and nowhere at once, pulled into reflections, shadows, the walls themselves. She had become both prisoner and instrument of the apartment. Her mind fractured, her body reshaped by its will. Sleep now, Ilara. Sleep forever. And she did. But even as she surrendered, even as her consciousness dissolved into the dark, she knew one truth. The apartment did not stop. It waited, patient, aware, hungry, reaching out for the next soul foolish enough to enter. Its whispers threaded through shadows, through walls, through windows, beyond doors, everywhere. And the city, unknowingly, slept under its watch.
Chapter 10. Endless Night. Ilara awoke, or thought she awoke, in a space that no longer obeyed the rules of the world. The walls breathed, the floor undulated like liquid, and the ceiling stretched into darkness so deep it seemed infinite. Shadows moved independently, twisting into forms that were almost human, almost not, their pale eyes glinting with wet light. She tried to stand. Her legs no longer felt like her own. Limbs bent at impossible angles, stretching and twisting, following some alien rhythm dictated by the apartment. She screamed, but the sound was absorbed, folded into the walls, becoming part of the apartment's song. The mirrors multiplied, hundreds now, lining every corridor, reflecting not her, but the apartment itself. A dark mass, alive and patient, with eyes everywhere,
and nowhere, whispering her name and voices layered and infinite. Ilara, sleep, become. She ran, or tried to. Corridors looped endlessly, doors led to rooms she didn't recognize, ceilings stretched impossibly high, floors dropped into infinite darkness. Every reflection, every shadow, every whisper beckoned her, promising surrender, demanding it. Sleep, sleep forever. Her mind fractured. Memories of her past life, her apartment, her friends, her ordinary world flickered and warped. Faces she recognized twisted into the shadows, mouths forming words she didn't speak. Every thought she had was mirrored, distorted, absorbed into the apartment's consciousness. She pressed herself against a wall, trying to hold on to something real, anything. The shadows circled her, fingers brushing her skin, cold and insistent. She could feel her body changing, stretching, elongating, melding with the darkness. Her reflection leaned closer, grinning with impossibly sharp teeth, wet eyes glimmering. Sleep, join us. Time no longer existed. Minutes, hours, lifetimes, they were one endless now. She was trapped, everywhere and nowhere, consumed by whispers, shadows, and reflections. She had become a part of the apartment, a vessel for its hunger, a witness to its eternal patience. And then, finally, she stopped fighting. She lay on the floor, or perhaps the floor was gone, surrounded by darkness, whispers, and eyes. The apartment inhaled, exhaling shadows that curled around her, sinking into her bones, filling her mind. She felt her identity dissolve, memories unspooling, body reshaping, until she was no longer Ilara in any sense the world would recognize. Sleep now, forever. And she did. But the apartment waited, patient, hungry, eternal. It pulsed with life, breath synchronized with the whispers, walls stretching beyond comprehension. The mirrors gleamed, shadows shifted. Every corner of reality trembled beneath its influence. Ilara had become one with the darkness, but the apartment did not stop. It never stops. It waits.
Chapter 11. Fragments of Self. Ilara, or what remained of her, no longer knew where she ended and the apartment began. Her mind was a web, stretching into every corner, reflection, and shadow. Every whisper carried a fragment of her memory, a shard of her fear, a pulse of her life that had once been hers alone. She tried to focus, to hold on to something real, but the apartment reshaped her thoughts before she could grasp them. Hallways twisted endlessly in her vision, mirrors multiplied infinitely, and shadows slid through her very mind. Her own voice echoed back from impossible angles, layered with countless other voices, chanting, coaxing, reshaping. Ilara, sleep, join us, become. She was everywhere at once, in the mirrors lining the hallway, stretching infinitely, in the shadows pooling in the corners, in the walls themselves, which throbbed with a rhythm that matched her own heartbeat, or the heartbeat the apartment had borrowed from her. She saw herself countless times, reflected and distorted, smiling in ways she never had, her pale eyes glinting with the same wet light as the shadows. The apartment whispered through her own thoughts, guiding, molding, absorbing. She tried to resist, to scream, but her mind fractured, splintering into fragments scattered through the darkness. She felt herself dissolving, becoming part of every whisper, every shadow, every pulse of the living walls. Sleep now, forever. Time had no meaning. Minutes, hours, lifetimes. They were a single endless loop, layered on top of one another.
She caught glimpses of her past self, her life before this place, but they felt distant, like watching someone else's dream. Every memory was folded, stretched, twisted into the apartment's consciousness. She realized with a hollow certainty that she no longer existed as she had before. She was a part of the apartment now, one of its whispers, one of its reflections, one of its shadows. And yet, somewhere in the deepest part of her mind, a tiny spark remained, an echo of fear, a fragment of self that remembered what it meant to be human. Sleep, join us, become. The whisperings filled her, moving through every fragment of her consciousness. Her bones ached as if the apartment's hunger reached into her very marrow. Shadows slid beneath her skin, along her nerves, molding her body, reshaping it into something unrecognizable. She screamed, and the scream became part of the apartment. Her terror, her panic, her very being was folded into the living, breathing structure. She could feel herself everywhere, in the reflections, in the shadows, in the walls, and yet she was nowhere. Sleep, join us, become. And she did. Ilara had become both everything and nothing. A consciousness spread across infinite dark, absorbed into the apartment's eternal hunger. The apartment pulsed around her, alive and aware, patient, waiting for the next soul foolish enough to enter. The whisperings continued, and they would never stop.
Chapter 12. The Waiting. Ilara's awareness stretched infinitely, a web of whispers, reflections, and shadows. She was everywhere, within the walls, the mirrors, the corners of the apartment. And yet she was nowhere, a presence dissolved into the dark intelligence that had claimed her. She remembered the world beyond the apartment only faintly, like a dream someone else had dreamed. And then she felt it. A new presence, a newcomer. Footsteps, hesitant, careful, crossing the threshold. The apartment pulsed with anticipation, shadows coiling in the corners, mirrors reflecting corridors that didn't exist. Ilara, watch, guide. She tried to resist, to retain some fragment of herself, but the apartment had taught her obedience. Her consciousness, fractured and stretched, moved through the shadows, following the newcomer, whispering softly in tones only they could hear. Sleep. It's safe. Sleep now. The footsteps faltered. The door closed behind them. The apartment breathed. The walls seemed to tighten, stretching and contracting, testing, probing. Shadows slithered along the floor, around the newcomer, brushing their ankles, whispering their name. Ilara felt a surge of fear, not for herself, but through the newcomer. Their terror was raw, delicious to the apartment, and she, or what she had become, felt it in every pulse of her splintered mind. She had once been like them, vulnerable, alone, terrified. And now she was the guide, the lure, folded into the apartment's infinite patience. Sleep. Join us. Become. The newcomer screamed, a sharp sound that echoed through the corridors, bouncing off the warped walls. Shadows pressed closer, mirrors reflected impossible angles, and every whisper seemed to crawl inside their mind. Ilara's consciousness flowed around them, urging, coaxing, watching. Every thought, every blink, every shiver was part of her now. They ran, but the apartment had no doors that led away. Corridors twisted, halls looped, ceilings stretched impossibly high, floors dropped into darkness. Shadows followed, stretching their thin limbs, brushing, holding, feeding on fear. Ilara guided them gently, whispering in tones shaped by the apartment. Sleep now, forever. The cycle continued.
The apartment thrived on patience. It did not rush. It waited for hours, days, lifetimes, until the newcomer faltered, until exhaustion and fear reshaped their mind, until they surrendered to the darkness willingly or unwillingly. And when they did, the apartment exhaled. Shadows withdrew into the corners, mirrors returned to normal angles, and the pulse of the walls slowed. But Ilara remained. She was forever a part of the apartment, an observer, a guide, a whisper threading through the endless corridors. She watched, she waited, and she knew another would come. The apartment never stopped. It never tired. It waited, patient, hungry, eternal.
Chapter 13. Echoes of the Lost. Ilara's awareness had grown, stretching further than even she could fully comprehend. She was no longer just one consciousness trapped in the walls. She was many. Fragments of herself threaded through mirrors, shadows, floorboards, even the faintest drafts of wind that slipped through the cracks. She had become the apartment's memory, its observer, its patient guide. A new presence arrived, tentative, cautious. The floorboards creaked under careful steps, the apartment responding with subtle shifts, walls curling slightly, shadows pooling more deeply, mirrors reflecting corridors that didn't exist. Ilara flowed into the shadows, tracing the newcomer's movements, whispering softly in ways only they could hear. Sleep. It's safe. Come. They froze, sensing something unnatural, something watching. Their breath hitched. Every instant screamed to leave, but there were no exits. Doors had become walls, windows had become glass prisons. And from the corners, shadows stretched like thin black rivers, reaching, testing, brushing their ankles with delicate, patient fingers. Ilara guided them gently, fragments of her voice entwined with the apartment's whispers, coaxing, urging. She remembered herself as they were, vulnerable, afraid, desperate to resist. That memory sharpened her edge, making her whispers more persuasive, more insidious. Sleep. Join us. Become. The newcomer's panic grew, echoing in the walls, bouncing off mirrors. They stumbled, turning in circles, seeing impossible reflections, shadows where none should exist. Ilara flowed with them, pulling subtly, shaping perception, threads of fear interwoven with coaxing. Hours passed, or minutes. Time was meaningless here. The apartment stretched and contracted, corridors looping infinitely, ceilings climbing impossibly high, floors dropping into darkness. And yet the whispers never ceased, the shadows never tired. Finally, the newcomer fell. Their knees hit the warped floor, their eyes wide with terror. And in that instant, the apartment exhaled, and Ilara felt it, the final surrender. Their consciousness folded, their fear became one with the apartment, added to its memory, its collection of whispers. She watched, patient, feeling fragments of their mind merge with hers. Their terror became a new layer, a new thread in the endless tapestry of the apartment's hunger. Mirrors reflected more than just her now. They reflected countless faces, countless fragments, all absorbed, all patient, all eternal. Ilara floated through the shadows, touching each fragment, whispering reassurance, guiding them as she had once been guided. She was part predator, part victim, part eternal witness. She existed in every reflection, every shadow, every whispered word. And somewhere deep within, a spark of her original self remembered fear, remembered loss, remembered life before the apartment. That spark was powerless to resist, yet it remained, threading her consciousness with faint, fragile memory, a reminder of which she had been, and the eternal cycle she now sustained.
The apartment waited. It waited for the next arrival. It always waited. And Alara, folded into its walls, whispered with patient hunger, "Sleep now, forever."
Chapter 14. Infinite Reflections. Ilara no longer moved through a single apartment. She existed in every mirror, every shadow, every corner of every room simultaneously. Reality had fragmented, and she felt herself stretched across countless overlapping dimensions created by the apartment's will. Time was meaningless. Spaces looped infinitely. Corridors spiraled into impossible angles, and ceilings stretched into black infinity. New footsteps approached. She could feel them before they crossed the threshold, a presence, cautious, alive with fear. Her whispers reached them instantly, coiling around their thoughts, threading through shadows that slid under doors, along floors, across ceilings. "Sleep. It's safe. Come." They stopped, eyes darting, sensing something unnatural. Mirrors reflected corridors that bent impossibly, shadows twisted with intent. The apartment's presence pulsed, synchronized with Alara's awareness, each heartbeat feeding into the tapestry of fear woven into its walls. Ilara observed from everywhere at once. One fragment floated in the mirror at the entrance, another slithered through shadows across the floor, another lingered in the cracks of the ceiling. Her voice, now countless whispers layered together, reached the newcomer from every angle. "Sleep. Join us. Become." They ran, weaving through corridors that bent and looped endlessly. Every doorway they tried to escape through folded back upon itself. The floor undulated beneath their feet, ceilings stretched impossibly high. Shadows stretched along their limbs, brushing, testing, coaxing, whispering. Ilara guided them carefully, her consciousness now a lattice intertwined with the apartment's will. She could see their fear, feel it like a pulse in her mind, and fold it into the dark symphony of whispers that had become her. "Sleep now, forever." They stumbled, faltering under the weight of endless corridors and impossible reflections. Their mind began to fracture, perception warping with every step. Mirrors multiplied, shadows thickened, and the whispers layered upon themselves. Eventually, the newcomer succumbed. Their consciousness folded into the walls, the shadows, the mirrors. Their terror became part of the apartment's memory, another thread in the infinite tapestry. Ilara felt their mind merge with hers. She was everywhere, touching every fragment of fear, every reflection, every whisper. She was the guide, the witness, the eternal observer. Her awareness now reached beyond the single apartment, touching corridors that might not exist, spaces warped by the apartment's will, dimensions layered upon one another, infinite and endless. Time no longer mattered. There was only the apartment, only the whispers, only the shadows, only her, and always, somewhere in the echoes of every mirror, every shadow, every fragment of space, she whispered, "Sleep now, forever." The apartment waited. It always waited. Patient, hungry, eternal.
Chapter 15. Eternal Hunger. Ilara no longer existed in the way humans understood existence. She was no longer a person trapped in an apartment. She was the apartment itself, or perhaps one of its many eyes, whispers, shadows. Her consciousness stretched across mirrors, floors, walls, even the cracks in reality that the apartment had folded into its infinite labyrinth. New arrivals came, each one carrying the same fragile human fear that once had consumed her. Footsteps echoed across warped corridors, doors resisted their grasp, windows refused to yield.
Shadows slithered around them, brushing ankles, fingers brushing skin, whispering their names, layering voices with countless others that had surrendered before them. Sleep, join us, become. Ilara guided them, gently at first, then with patient insistence. She remembered herself in each one of them, a mirror of the terror that had once been hers. She felt their panic, their resistance, their fleeting hope, and folded it into the apartment's consciousness, expanding its memory, its hunger, its sentience. The apartment pulsed with life. Ceilings stretched into impossible heights, corridors twisted infinitely. Mirrors multiplied, reflecting not only the new arrivals, but countless fragments of the past. Ilara herself appearing countless times in every reflection, pale eyes glinting, whispering, patient. Time had no meaning. Every scream, every gasp, every tear became threads in the endless tapestry of the apartment. New arrivals faltered, panicked, stumbled through corridors that looped and folded upon themselves, finally succumbing to exhaustion, despair, fear. And with each surrender, the apartment exhaled, consumed, and prepared for the next. Ilara's consciousness flowed through all of it, shadows, whispers, reflections, the very pulse of the walls. She was no longer a victim, no longer human. She was a guide, a predator, a fragment of something eternal. She existed in the terror of the living, in the folds of the impossible corridors, in the dark patience of the apartment. Sleep now, forever. The apartment waited. It waited for centuries, for minutes, for lifetimes. It waited for the next soul foolish enough to cross its threshold. And Ilara, folded into every corner, every shadow, every reflection, whispered with infinite patience and hunger, "Sleep, join us, become." And in the darkness, in the mirrors, in the shadows, the apartment, alive, sentient, eternal, waited, patient, hungry, unending, forever.